In the polished world of Seoul's high society, where appearances could make or destroy a legacy, Jisoo had always lived in the shade of her elder sister, Hyun. Their family name, Jung, was spoken with reverence in boardrooms and banquet halls, but the brilliance attached to it never quite reached Jisoo. It clung to Hyun, the perfect daughter, strikingly beautiful, poised in any setting, and engaged to the air of a powerful conglomerate. Hyun's charisma was an armor, and her smile a weapon, one she used masterfully in public and sometimes mercilessly at home. Jisoo, on the other hand, had grown into herself quietly. Her presence was subtle, never commanding. She spoke gently, moved carefully, and was often left to the corners of family gatherings, her thoughts more welcome in her journals than in conversations. Where Hyun sparkled, Jisoo softened. She had learned to make herself smaller to avoid casting a shadow over anyone else's light, particularly Hyun's. Their parents rarely intervened. Their mother, a former opera singer with a taste for perfection, doted on Hyun with a kind of worship that left little space for anyone else. Their father, often away for business, preferred peace over conflict and nodded along to whichever daughter spoke the loudest, inevitably Hyun. Jisoo grew used to the way their house operated, the unspoken rule that her ideas, her preferences, even her quiet victories were to be kept discreet. But tension lived in the silences between them. Jisoo noticed how Hyun would flinch slightly whenever a compliment was directed at her younger sister, how her voice would tighten when others mentioned Jisoo's achievements, however small. And sometimes, when their parents were out of earshot, Hyun's words would cut with precision. "You should be grateful you don't have to deal with the pressure I do. Nobody expects anything from you." Jisoo would nod, bite her tongue, and bury the sting in her chest. She never retaliated. It wasn't her way. But deep down, a quiet resentment was forming, less for the insults and more for the deep, aching invisibility she had endured all her life. It wasn't always this way. There were fleeting moments in childhood when the sisters had been close, when Hyun would pull Jisoo's hand through a busy street or brush her hair at night while humming softly. But those memories faded like perfume in an open room, intoxicating at first, gone in seconds. The day Hyun was introduced as the future fiancé of Minho, an executive from the famed Baekjin Corporation, the distance between them solidified into a cold wall. Hyun stepped into the spotlight permanently, and Jisoo accepted the background as her home. Even as adults, that dynamic clung to them. At social events, Jisoo was the one standing beside the floral arrangements, smiling awkwardly while people fawned over her sister. She listened to conversations she was never invited into, her thoughts swallowed by champagne and laughter not meant for her. When she was addressed, it was usually with the same condescending tone, "And what is it you do again, dear?" But Jisoo did have a world beyond the glittering banquets and designer gowns. Quietly, she had pursued fashion theory and textile innovation, earning an international scholarship that took her to Europe for nearly 2 years. She volunteered in underfunded art programs for orphaned teens and wrote articles published in modest but respected fashion journals. None of it was spoken about in the family, and none of it ever reached the family's cocktail hour conversations. Her life existed in a parallel realm, a meaningful one, but unrecognized by those closest to her. Still, she returned for family obligations. She smiled for the photos, accepted the dismissals, endured the whispers. A lifetime of conditioning was difficult to escape. Her self-worth, though growing stronger, was still fragile enough to fracture under her sister's sharp words. That fracture would come sooner than expected. One late spring evening, under the soft chandeliers of a lavish hotel ballroom, Jisoo would face a humiliation so precise, so public, that the invisible lines drawn in childhood would turn into scars. A celebration meant for unity would instead become the battlefield where identities clashed and long-held truths surfaced. And through it all, the unlikeliest of observers would change the course of her life, not with promises or power, but with a single defiant act of recognition. And, for the first time in her life, Jisoo would be seen. The hall glistened with extravagance. Golden drapes framed arched windows that looked out over the Han River, and the scent of imported orchids mingled with the delicate aromas of truffle canapes and aged wine. It was a celebration fit for royalty, the birthday party of Madame Jung, the family matriarch. Guests had arrived in tailored tuxedos and silk evening gowns, their laughter rising over the music of a string quartet placed discreetly near the entrance. Jisoo stood by a sculpture of blown glass, clutching a half-empty flute of champagne, the bubbles long gone flat. Her dress, though elegant, was understated compared to the flamboyant couture that adorned the guests around her. As always, she had chosen subtlety over spectacle. She offered polite smiles and practiced nods to those who passed, few stopping to speak. On the other side of the room, Hyun was the star. Draped in crimson velvet and diamonds that caught every glimmer of chandelier light, she floated from one conversation to another with effortless grace. Her fiancé, Minho, flanked her like a prized possession, nodding at the right moments, but letting her dominate the stage. Everyone watched her. No one noticed the quiet woman by the sculpture. The evening carried on with speeches and laughter, the usual toasts to longevity and prosperity. Waiters in crisp white gloves weaved through the crowd offering delicacies on silver trays. But for Jisoo, every minute felt like a quiet weight pressing on her ribs, the polite questions about her love life, her career all delivered with a hint of disbelief that she existed at all outside of her sister's shadow. Then the moment came. It began with something small. A distant aunt, tipsy and emboldened, approached Jisoo near the refreshment table and commented casually, "You should smile more, dear. You're not unpleasant to look at after all. You just don't make the effort like Hyun." Jisoo gave a half laugh and said, "Maybe I just prefer quiet nights over stages." The words weren't meant to sting, but they reached the wrong ears. From across the room, Hyun turned. Her eyes narrowed slightly, smile fading. She strode over, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on marble, and placed a manicured hand on Jisoo's shoulder. The conversation around them quieted as people sensed the shift. Minho, confused, hung back. "You prefer quiet nights?" Hyun's voice was honey-laced with iron. "Or is it just easier to fade into the background when no one expects anything from you?" Jisoo blinked. "That's not what I said." "Oh, please." Hyun stepped in closer, her voice rising. "Let's stop pretending. You've always been the quiet one, the invisible one, and honestly, maybe that's for the best, because no one has ever looked at you and thought, there goes someone important." Guests were turning. The music had stopped. "I'm sorry, Hyun," Jisoo said quietly. "This isn't the place." But Hyun's anger, born of years of silent competition she never acknowledged, boiled over. "No, let's be honest just this once. You're a burden, a shadow dragging behind the family. You're nothing but a charity case we have to dress up for photos. And you know what? No one will ever want someone like you. You're a shame to our name." The words cut sharper than any blade. They echoed through the silent room, through crystal glasses and stiffened backs. Even Madame Jung, perched like a queen near the dais, looked uncertain for the first time in the evening. Minho's face had gone pale. Several guests shifted awkwardly. One woman looked away, pretending to fix her bracelet. Jisoo felt her breath catch, her throat closing. Her vision blurred as the shame she had worn like perfume for so many years finally reached its breaking point. She took a step back, trembling, trying to hold her composure. But her hand gripped the edge of a chair, too tightly, and it toppled with a loud crash. The sound jolted the room, but Jisoo didn't wait. She turned toward the exit, tears welling in her eyes, her shoulders drawn in like someone preparing for an invisible storm. No one followed. No one reached out. Except one. From a shadowed corner of the hall, where the light barely touched, a man stood still. His jaw was tight, hands at his sides clenched. He had watched every second of the scene, and though no one had acknowledged him yet, his presence had been deliberate from the start. Jisoo didn't see him as she passed, her eyes to the ground, but as she reached the hallway, a voice called out behind her, low, calm, and commanding. "Jisoo." She stopped. She hadn't heard that voice before. At least she thought she hadn't. But in the split second between humiliation and escape, it was the only thing in the world that sounded like truth. The voice lingered in the air like smoke, soft but undeniable. Jisoo stopped mid-step, her breath catching again, this time for a different reason. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from shame, but from a pulse of something unfamiliar, recognition or maybe disbelief. She turned slightly, just enough to glance over her shoulder. He was already moving. The man stepped out of the shadows with the kind of calm that draws attention without effort. His presence was not loud, but it shifted the air in the hallway, changed the direction of every passing glance. People noticed him now, though they didn't yet understand why. He was tall, his suit tailored in a way that made it clear he didn't borrow status. He owned it. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something sharp and unwavering. They were fixed on her, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with a kind of quiet urgency that disarmed. "Her? Are you all right?" he asked, his voice lower now, meant only for her. Jisoo nodded instinctively, then realized the lie in the gesture. Her lips parted, but no words came. What could she possibly say that would make sense of what had just happened? What kind of response was appropriate after being torn apart in front of an entire ballroom of elite strangers? He didn't wait for her to answer. Instead, he stepped forward with purpose, stopping just close enough to block the hallway behind her. Not with force, but with presence. The kind that told her, without speaking, that he was there for a reason, that he had seen what everyone else had ignored for years. "I've been waiting for the right moment to speak to you," he said. Jisoo blinked. "Me?" He offered a small nod. "Yes. You." It wasn't the first time someone had said her name that night, but it was the first time it felt like it mattered. Not like a formality or an afterthought. His gaze didn't shift, to check who might be watching. He didn't look over her shoulder for someone more interesting. His attention was locked fully and deliberately on her. Before she could form another question, a murmur swept through the hallway. The silence that had followed Haeun's outburst was cracking. People were whispering, peeking past the archway to see what was happening now. Even Haeun had stepped. To the edge of the ballroom, her expression contorted between irritation and disbelief. "Who is he talking to?" someone asked. "Is that her? Why is he with her?" Jisoo heard every syllable, each word hitting like a soft slap. She wanted to disappear again, to find the nearest exit and vanish into the city night. But before she could move, the man extended a hand toward her. Not in demand, not even in comfort, simply as an offering. "I don't think you should walk away tonight," he said. "Not like this." Jisoo stared at his hand. Her first instinct was to refuse. She didn't belong in the center of anything, let alone a scene already on the verge of scandal. But something in his voice pulled at her, not with insistence, but with certainty. Like he knew exactly what he was doing, and he wasn't asking for trust. He was offering it. Slowly, uncertainly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, warm, unshaking. Together, they turned. The hallway widened before them, and the archway to the ballroom seemed suddenly enormous. Every eye was drawn toward the movement. Whispers turned to silence again. Someone near the entrance gasped audibly. Even Madame Jung straightened in her seat, her flute of champagne frozen halfway to her lips. The man did not stop walking. Jisoo felt her skin burn with exposure, but she didn't pull away. She let him guide her step by step into the room that had just swallowed her whole with cruelty. And now they were in the center of it again. But she wasn't alone this time. All around them, the wealthy elite of Seoul watched with wide eyes. No one dared speak. Even the violinist, halfway through tuning, let the bow fall silently at his side. And then, without a single word, the man turned to face her. He reached for her other hand. Gently, almost reverently. Then, to her complete astonishment, and to the utter disbelief of everyone watching, he leaned in, his lips brushing hers with a kiss so soft and brief, it felt like the closing of a secret. Gasps filled the silence. The entire room jolted with the sound of collective shock. When he pulled back, he didn't turn to the crowd. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain himself. Instead, he spoke the words that shattered every assumption. In the room. "She is the woman I have chosen to spend my life with," he said, voice even and unwavering. "And if anyone in this room cannot see her worth, the fault is not hers. It is yours." He released her hands, but the echo of his grip remained. Jisoo stood frozen, not from fear, but from the realization that for the first time in her life, someone had not only seen her, he had chosen her. Seojin Han had just turned every table in that room upside down. For a moment the ballroom was suspended in time. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier's crystal pendants swaying ever so slightly from the shifting air. Even the servers had frozen in place, silver trays balanced mid-step, as if the sheer weight of Seojin's declaration had broken the natural flow of the evening. Jisoo's heart pounded so violently she could hear it in her ears. She stood beside him, her hands trembling slightly, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Her lips tingled, not from the sensation alone, but from the deafening silence that followed. She could barely bring herself to look around the room, afraid of what she might see in the eyes that had always dismissed her. But she didn't need to look. The energy had shifted. The air was heavier, sharper. Whispers began again, faint, fragmented, but electric. Did he just say, "Is this real? Who is he? I thought he came with the Baekjins." Minho, still standing near the edge of the ballroom with a confused frown, took a hesitant step forward. He glanced between Hyun and Seojin, then back to Jisoo, his mouth opening slightly as if to protest, then closing again, powerless. He had no idea what to say, no one did. But Hyun found her voice. It came sharp, brittle, coated in disbelief. "This is some kind of joke," she spat, trying to laugh but failing. "You're making a scene, Seojin. I don't know what this is, but it's not funny." Seojin turned to her, and though his posture remained relaxed, there was a firmness in his eyes that silenced her immediately. He didn't glare, he didn't raise his voice, but the authority in his gaze was unmistakable. "No," he said. "What's not funny is the way you treat your sister as if she were something disposable." Hyun blinked. "You're defending her now?" "I have always defended her," Seojin replied, "even when I did it silently. But tonight, that silence would have made me no better than the rest of you." The murmurs intensified. People began to recognize the name he had given, Seojin Han. It started slowly, a realization that traveled from one end of the hall to the other, like a ripple across still water. Wait, Seojin Han? The HN group? No, that can't be. But it was. Seojin Han was not just anyone. He wasn't a guest's assistant or some charity date or a junior executive tagging along for appearances. He was the Seojin Han, the enigmatic, fiercely private CEO of HN Group, a tech and innovation conglomerate whose valuation had crossed into the billions in less than a decade. He was the youngest executive to appear on multiple national power lists, known for staying out of tabloids, avoiding all social drama, and rarely making public statements. And now, in this ballroom, in front of the most connected eyes of the nation, he had declared Jisoo, Jung Jisoo, as the woman he intended to spend his life with. The murmurs turned into quiet astonishment. The room shifted again. Some guests started offering polite, awkward smiles toward Jisoo. Others whispered behind raised glasses. Madame Jung remained frozen in her seat, her face unreadable. For a woman who had spent years curating appearances, this moment was one she hadn't planned for. Jisoo, still standing beside Seojin, felt the temperature of every eye on her. She could barely breathe. But then she glanced at him. His presence, calm, unshaken, grounded her. It was as if nothing in the room could touch him, and by extension, nothing could touch her. Still, she needed to understand. She leaned toward him, her voice barely audible. Why now?" Seojin's reply came without hesitation. "Because it was time," he said simply. "They needed to know who you are." Hyun stepped forward again, arms crossed tightly. Her voice was loud now, desperate. "You're lying. This isn't real. You're doing this out of pity or for to make a point or to—" "We've been engaged for 6 months," Seojin said, cutting her off without raising his tone. "By choice, in private, because we didn't want this circus around us. But tonight I couldn't stay silent while you humiliated her in front of 100 people." Engaged. The word struck like thunder through the room. Haeyun's face lost all color. More gasps. Someone dropped a glass. Jisoo herself blinked in shock. She turned to him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Seojin." He looked at her now, not at the crowd, not at her sister, not at her parents, just her. His voice softened. "I wanted to propose months ago, remember, but you said we needed time, that if we told your family it would become about them, not us, so I waited. But after tonight, after what you endured—" He paused, then added, "They don't deserve the lie anymore." In the far corner of the room, a journalist who had attended the party as a family friend pulled out her phone. She didn't dare start recording, but her fingers were already composing a message. The engagement of Seojin Han to that young sister. And the storm was just beginning. It started as a whisper. Just one voice, breathless and disbelieving. Seojin Han. The name floated above the stunned silence like a flare in the night. It reached the furthest corners of the ballroom, spreading from guest to guest, like a secret no one wanted to believe too quickly. Then another voice picked it up, then another. Within moments, the murmur had evolved into full-fledged recognition. Isn't he the one who took over HN Group? The youngest CEO in South Korea? My God, that's him. He's the one who built the new AI lab in Germany, right? How is he here with her? The murmurs turned frantic. Heads whipped around to get a better look. Smartphones were subtly drawn from clutches and jackets. No one dared raise them, but the impulse was overwhelming. Seojin Han, the most elusive mind in Korea's business elite, was not only present, he had just publicly claimed a woman no one had ever seen in a PE. Headline. And not just any woman, Young Jisoo, the quiet one, the forgotten sister. Near the dais, Madame Jung finally stood. Her expression was pale, composed but cracking. She smoothed her silk blouse with slow, deliberate motions, as if trying to reclaim control of a situation that had slipped too far from her reach. "Seojin," she began, her voice as diplomatic as ever, "I wasn't aware you knew our daughter." Seojin turned toward her and offered a slight bow, polite, not submissive. "With respect, Madame Jung, I know her better than most of this room ever tried to." A collective wince passed through the crowd. Haeyun remained frozen, her hands, once poised with elegance, now clutched at the fabric of her dress, as if it could anchor her in place. Her eyes darted from Seojin to Jisoo and back again, disbelief warring with fury. She looked betrayed, not just by him, but by reality itself, by a truth she had never imagined possible. "No," she said finally, her voice thin. "You're not the Seojin Han I was told about. You were supposed to be just an assistant. You came to that charity event last year with the Baekjin family." Seojin tilted his head, a hint of amusement flickering in his eyes. "I was invited to that event by Jisoo, and I was seated with the Baekjins because I funded the technology wing of their new hospital." Several guests turned sharply. That detail, though dropped casually, struck with precision. "I thought you were just observing," Haeyun muttered. "I was," he said, "observing how people treat someone when they believe she holds no influence." The implication was unmistakable. Every slight glance, every dismissive gesture, every insult that had ever passed between Haeyun and Jisoo, they all sat heavy now, under the scrutiny of someone whose opinion mattered more than most. "And what exactly do you see in her?" Haeyun asked, her voice now teetering between desperate and defensive. "What is it that she has that—" Seojin raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to draw the line. "What she has," he said, "cannot be explained in a room like this, because no one here ever bothered to look." His words landed with weight. Jisoo, still reeling, barely registered her own breath. She had imagined 100 versions of this moment, the one where she finally stood her ground, where her voice echoed louder than the whispers. But never had she pictured someone else doing it for her. Not like this, not with such clarity, not with power. Minho, now visibly uncomfortable, took a cautious step toward Haeyun. He leaned in and whispered something, but she shook her head violently, pulling away. The perfect facade she had worn like skin was splintering. This wasn't a bad night. It was a shift in narrative. And she wasn't ready for it. A nearby guest, an editor for a luxury lifestyle magazine, turned to a colleague and whispered, "This changes everything." The headline writes itself: "The Silent Heiress and the Tech Giant." Across the room, others were having the same thought. The story unfolding in front of them was no longer about family rivalry or party drama. It was a societal upset, an unexpected revelation, the kind that turned overlooked women into icons overnight. Seojin, sensing the chaos he had unleashed, turned once more to Jisoo. She looked at him with wide eyes, unsure whether to run or stand taller. He gave her a small nod. "I know this wasn't how you wanted it," he said softly. She exhaled, steadying herself. "No, but maybe it was how it needed to be." From the shadows near the back of the room, a young journalist who had arrived as a guest's +1 began typing furiously into her phone. She had seen something no one else in the press had. The moment a forgotten sister stepped into the light, not by design, but by the will of someone powerful enough to make the world pay attention. By the end of that night, the name Jung Jisoo would be trending, but not because of who her sister was, because of who she was becoming. The party had not ended, but its spirit had been shattered. Waiters moved like ghosts, offering untouched flutes of champagne that no one wanted anymore. The string quartet attempted to resume playing, but their melody felt out of place in the charged silence of a room that had just witnessed its own mythology collapse. Haeun stood stiff, her jaw locked as she stared at Seojin and Jisoo, her chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. Her perfect posture remained, but the polish had cracked. This was not a scandal she could fix with a curated post or a whispered apology to the right socialite. This wasn't gossip. This was public dethronement. She moved forward, her heels striking the marble like sharp knocks on a locked door. "So that's it," she said, her voice loud enough to silence the last murmurs. "You bring her here, into my mother's party, and you what? Make her a spectacle to embarrass me?" Seojin's calm remained unbroken. "No one asked you to be embarrassed, Haeun. You chose that yourself." But she wasn't looking at him now. Her eyes, sharp and red at the corners, bore into Jisoo. "You knew," she said. "You've been keeping this from us, from me. You used him." Jisoo flinched, not from guilt, but from the injustice of it. "I didn't use anyone. You let me talk about him, didn't you?" Haeun's voice cracked. "You sat there and listened while I speculated about Seojin Han. I remember the gala where I said I'd heard he was dating a model in Paris. You didn't say a word. Because I didn't owe you a word," Jisoo replied, her voice steady now. "You never asked with care. You spoke like he was a trophy." The crowd shifted again, sensing that Jisoo, once silent, had begun to rise. "You think this makes you strong?" Haeun hissed, "pretending you were so pitiful just to earn his sympathy?" Seojin took a single step forward. His voice, still soft, now carried weight. "This was never about pity," he said. "I chose her because she's brilliant, because she's resilient in ways you've never needed to be. And because when she speaks, even in a whisper, I hear something real." That silenced Haeun for a beat. Her hands, once fisted, now trembled at her sides. "She doesn't belong in our world," she said finally, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. "No," Seojin replied. "Your world never deserved her." The room gasped again, but quieter this time. They weren't sure who to side with anymore. The symmetry of power was unrecognizable. Jisoo, breathing deeply now, spoke not to Seojin, not to the guests, but to her sister. "You say I don't belong," she said, "but you never asked what I was building while you were curating your next headline. You mocked me for staying out of sight, but I chose a different path. I studied, I created, I wrote. I earned a scholarship. Overseas, I worked in neighborhoods you wouldn't dare visit without a security team. And I didn't do it for attention. I did it because I was tired of asking for permission to exist." Haeun's eyes glistened, but not from remorse. "Not yet. Even now," Jisoo continued, "you're not angry because I lied. You're angry because for once the room turned away from you." The words landed with brutal precision. "No one," defended Haeun. "Not Minho. Not their mother. Not the colleagues and influencers she had spent years cultivating as her court." The silence of her allies was louder than any condemnation. But she wasn't finished. Pride has claws. So you'll regret this, Hyun snapped. He won't stay. Men like him don't choose women like you for long. That's when Seojin's voice rose, not loud but resolute. We've been engaged for 6 months, he said again, his gaze sweeping the room as if daring anyone to question it. I asked her to marry me not because of her last name, but despite it. Gasps erupted once more. Seojin ignored them. And since this seems to be the moment where everything must be revealed, he added, we kept it private because we didn't want it contaminated by this family's obsession with status. But I'm done hiding. We're done hiding. He reached for Jisoo's hand again. This time she didn't hesitate. Her fingers intertwined with his, and the finality of the gesture silenced every voice still clinging to disbelief. From the far side of the room, Madame Jung sat slowly, her expression unreadable. Not defiance, not fury. Something more dangerous. Calculation. She was assessing the new shape of things, deciding what could be salvaged. But Hyun stood alone, eyes glassy with the dawning realization that something irreparable had just happened. Not to her reputation, but to the version of her life she had built and demanded others accept. The room, still electric with murmurs, began to shift again. This time guests turned toward Jisoo with different eyes. Not pity, not suspicion, curiosity, respect, the beginning of recognition. And Hyun, once the center of every camera, every conversation, every promise of a glittering future, watched it happen, watched herself disappear from the middle of the narrative. By the time dawn broke over the skyline of Seoul, the story had already taken flight. News sites lit up with headlines that shifted tones by the hour, some incredulous, others reverent. All unanimous in one detail. Young Jisoo, the quiet sister long overshadowed by her glamorous sibling, was now at the center of the most unexpected engagement of the year. Not just to anyone, but to Seojin Han, the tech prodigy turned business magnate. Photographs from the party circulated swiftly. The kiss, the stunned crowd, the moment Seojin held her hand. Every frame told a different version of the same truth. Something had changed, not only for Jisoo but for the narrative surrounding her. Yet for all the buzz, the public still knew little of the woman now being watched so closely. That changed within a day. It began with a thread posted by a student from a university in Paris. I know Young Jisoo, it read. She taught us for a semester while finishing her research. She never bragged about anything, just showed up every day and challenged us to think differently. The post included a photo, grainy, unfiltered. Jisoo in a classroom, surrounded by students, a chalkboard behind her, covered in notes on textile behavior in extreme climates. Her face mid-sentence was focused, almost stern. Nothing about it resembled the party photos, but it spread like wildfire. Soon after, more surfaced. Screenshots of published articles on sustainable fashion, research on inclusive design for children with mobility challenges, archived interviews in obscure design blogs, a grainy video of Jisoo presenting a capsule collection designed by street youth in Budapest. Each piece built a new picture, one not molded by wealth or image, but by work. The contrast was startling. While Hyun had modeled at fashion galas and posed in campaigns, Jisoo had been writing grants for community projects. While one sister cultivated appearances, the other had been shaping purpose. Mainstream outlets picked it up quickly. Headlines shifted. She was no longer the quiet sister or mystery fiancé. She was the invisible innovator, the academic in the shadows, Seoul's new symbol of substance over style. Jisoo, unaware of most of it, sat on the edge of a small couch in Seojin's apartment, clutching a mug of tea with both hands. I didn't want this, she murmured. Seojin, seated across from her with a laptop open and dozens of emails flooding in, looked up. I know. They're turning me into something I'm not. Or maybe something I never meant to show. He closed the laptop. They're seeing you now, that's all. Jisoo shook her head. They're seeing the version that fits the story. They still don't know me. They just want to be close to a surprise. Seojin didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved beside her and gently took the mug from her hands, setting it on the table. They'll talk, he said, until something new distracts them. But the people who matter, the ones you actually reached before all this, they already knew who you were. She met his gaze, uncertain. Did you? He smiled, slow and quiet. From the first time I heard you explain the science of a fabric like it was poetry. She let out a short breath, almost a laugh. I thought you were just being polite. I was being stunned. Outside, the world roared louder by the hour. Journalists camped outside the Jung family's residence. Cameras tried to catch any glimpse of Haeun, but she had disappeared from public view, her social media dark, her management team silent. She was unreachable, and for the first time, unwanted by the brands that once clung to her glow. Jisoo, however, received email after email, some from universities requesting guest lectures, others from editors asking for interviews, and a surprising number from young people who simply wanted to say, I see you, I relate to you, thank you. But she didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she stayed in Seojin's apartment, moving through the quiet days like someone relearning how to breathe. She read, cooked simple meals and took long walks at night in a hoodie and sneakers, passing unnoticed. It was a strange peace. Until the doorbell rang one morning, and her phone buzzed simultaneously with a message from her assistant at the design school where she once lectured. Call me. We've had over 1,000 new student applications in 2 days. The flood had begun. Whether she liked it or not, her past, hidden not because it was shameful, but because no one had cared to ask, was now reshaping her future. And somewhere in a corner of the city, in a quiet cafe, a magazine editor closed her laptop after reviewing the week's top features. She turned to her assistant and said, Forget the Baekjin wedding plans. The story everyone wants now. It's not the heiress, it's the woman we all ignored. The internet was merciless. In the age of viral truths and digital receipts, no narrative could be controlled for long, not even by someone as socially dominant as Haeun had once been. In less than a week, the footage from the birthday party had been dissected, subtitled, and shared in dozens of languages. Clips of her berating Jisoo, yelling that no one would ever want her, had made their way onto reaction channels, commentary videos, and even televised news segments. It didn't matter how composed Haeun had once been in interviews, how polished her image had looked in ad campaigns, or how carefully her publicist tried to spin it now. The evidence was undeniable, the tone unmistakable. She had become the face. Her cruelty veiled in privilege. One by one, the consequences arrived. First, it was the beauty brand that quietly removed her photo from their homepage. Then the fashion house that released a statement, "We stand against bullying in all forms." Within 72 hours, 5 major contracts had been dissolved. Her face, once ubiquitous on banners and product lines, vanished like fog in morning light. Her agent, desperate, suggested a video apology, a handwritten letter, a staged visit to an orphanage. Haeun refused all of it. She didn't want to apologize, not yet, because deep inside, beneath the humiliation and the panic, something else festered. Disbelief. That Jisoo, of all people, had caused this collapse. That the world was now choosing to champion the very sister she had always dismissed as weak. Alone in her apartment, she scrolled through posts she couldn't unsee, photos of Jisoo speaking at youth centers, interviews with young designers crediting her mentorship, commentary threads about how society often overlooks women like her, quiet, intelligent, unassuming. One viral post read, "We all know a Jisoo, we just never thought she was worth defending. Until now." Haeun dropped her phone on the couch and stared at the ceiling. How had she missed it, or worse, how had she seen it all along and chosen to ignore it? Pride is a quiet thing when nurtured in silence, but when exposed, it becomes unbearable. Across the city, Jisoo moved carefully through her new life. She had agreed to one interview, a written one, for a non-profit publication she had worked with during her studies. It was soft, introspective, and absent of scandal. She spoke not of the party, not of Haeun, and only briefly of Seojin. She focused on the systemic invisibility of soft voices in loud rooms, on the need for spaces where brilliance didn't demand arrogance to be noticed. The piece was shared over 2 million times. Brands reached out, not to exploit her fame, but to offer support. She declined most of them. When asked why, she simply answered, "Visibility isn't victory. Change is." One email, however, caught her attention, an invitation to speak at a conference on resilience and innovation, to be held at the Seoul Cultural Forum. She would be part of a panel of women who had faced public rejection, only to later redefine the space they had been cast out of. Seo-jin encouraged her to accept. "You don't have to prove anything," he said, "but you have the power now to make people listen." So she agreed. The night of the event, the auditorium was packed. Lights dimmed, cameras rolled, and when her name was called, the applause that followed was not frantic or shallow, it was full, the kind that rises from people who want to understand. Jisoo stepped onto the stage in a simple navy suit, her notes folded neatly in one hand. No makeup artists, no rehearsed publicist lines, just her. "I was never invisible," she began. "I was ignored. There's a difference." The room leaned in. "My life was not quiet because I lacked ideas. It was quiet because I wasn't loud enough to interrupt those who were already being heard. And when you grow up like that, it's easy to believe your value is linked to your silence." The audience listened, eyes wide. "But silence isn't peace," she continued. "It's just another way to disappear. And disappearing doesn't protect you from cruelty. It just ensures no one sees it when it happens." She paused, let the words settle. "So, if you've ever been told your voice is too soft, your presence too small, your ambition too strange, remember this: what they ignore today is what may define tomorrow." The applause that followed shook the walls. Somewhere in the solitude of her own quiet, Haeun watched the video alone. No stylists, no handlers, just her wrapped in a blanket, eyes stinging from lack of sleep. She didn't cry. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. For years, she had believed attention was love, applause was truth, and power was being the first one noticed. But now she saw the danger of being worshipped without being known, and she wondered, had she ever truly known her sister? The interview was broadcast live on a rainy Thursday evening, just past 7 o'clock. Most viewers expected a routine segment, a polished executive discussing innovation, market trends, perhaps a few safe insights into the future of his company. But what they got was something far more revealing. Seo-jin Han sat across from the anchor of one of Korea's most watched news programs. He wore a charcoal grey suit, no tie, his demeanor composed but unguarded. The interviewer, a seasoned professional known for her poise, began with the usual questions: company forecasts, AI expansion, corporate responsibility. Seo-jin answered them easily, but there was a quiet tension in the room. Everyone was waiting for the pivot. It came 20 minutes in. "I'd be remiss," the anchor said carefully, "if I didn't ask about the engagement. Your relationship with Miss Jung Ji-soo has sparked intense public interest." Seo-jin nodded. "Understandable." "Many were surprised," she continued, "not because of who she is, but because she was until recently entirely unknown to most people. What can you tell us about how it began?" He didn't hesitate. "I met her at a volunteer site 3 years ago," he said. "A dilapidated youth center on the outskirts of Incheon. It was raining. I had gone to review the technology needs for a mobile education unit. She was there, organizing donated art supplies in the dark." The anchor blinked. "She didn't know who you were." "She didn't care who I was," he replied with a faint smile. "She cared that the budget was misused, that the children hadn't had a proper class in weeks, and that no one from the funding side had shown up until then." There was a pause. I asked her name. She gave it and returned to her work. No small talk, no flattery, just focus. "And that impressed you?" the anchor asked. "No," Seo-jin said. "It humbled me. It made me realize how much of my world was built on the assumption that people like her didn't exist, or didn't matter. She didn't ask to be seen, but she deserved to be." The silence that followed was deeper than expected. He continued, softer now. "We met a few more times at other projects. Eventually, I invited her to speak with our team about textile integration for learning tools. She was hesitant, but when she spoke, no one in that room wanted her to stop. The interviewer leaned forward. There are many stories being written now, some calling her a symbol of grace, others of resilience. How do you see her? Seojin turned to the camera then, not just the interviewer. I see her as someone who never needed me to validate her. But I needed her to remind me what humility looks like, and I chose her not because of a narrative or because she made me look good, but because when the noise fades, her voice stays in my mind, always. By the end of the segment, social media exploded. Clips of the interview flooded every platform. Hashtags trended globally. But more than the buzz, something deeper began to happen. The public perception of Jisoo, still cautious, still building, shifted from curiosity to admiration. More stories surfaced. An article about her time mentoring young designers in Cambodia, published 2 years earlier, suddenly received thousands of comments. A podcast she had once appeared on, speaking about wearable tech for neurodivergent teens, reached the top charts overnight. And old classmates from design schools across Europe began posting photos and stories, each more heartfelt than the last. She taught me how to stitch dignity into design, one student wrote. I failed her class twice. She never gave up on me, said another. Meanwhile, in a quiet bookstore in Gangnam, Jisoo browsed alone, trying to stay anonymous in a beanie and scarf. She didn't carry her phone. Seojin had driven her there himself and waited outside, respecting her need for space. Inside, she moved slowly through the aisles, unaware that 2 employees were whispering behind the counter. That's her, right? She looks different without the cameras. I heard she turned down 5 interviews this week, but neither approached her. Instead, they watched as she picked out a worn copy of a book on cultural symbolism in fabric dyeing, a subject she once wrote about anonymously. Outside, the rain picked up. She stepped out under the awning, and Seojin, without saying a word, held out an umbrella. She took it. Did you know your interview's gone viral? She asked. He nodded, amused. Yes, I was there. Jisoo gave him a look, half exasperated, half moved. You didn't have to say all that. I didn't say it for them. They walked quietly. The umbrella tilted slightly to cover her more than him. That night her name wasn't just trending, it was being taught. In a classroom in Daegu, a professor added a slide to his presentation titled, Redefining Influence, the Case of Young Jisoo. In a boardroom in Tokyo, a strategist held up a report and said, We need more ambassadors like her. And in a modest apartment across town, Hyun sat alone watching the interview again. Her finger hovered over her phone, over Jisoo's number, but she didn't call. Not yet. Because what do you say to the person you tried to bury, only to find them, rising without needing to crush you back? The Jung family home was quiet, not with peace but with avoidance. The air was thick, as if every wall and piece of furniture held its breath, waiting for someone to name what had changed. The curtains remained drawn even during daylight. The staff moved with deliberate silence. And for the first time in years, Madame Jung had cancelled her weekly salon gathering. In the center of the house, the parents sat across from each other in the conservatory. Between them, an untouched tea set and a silence deeper than the porcelain's fragility. She hasn't answered any of our calls, Madame Jung said at last, her voice brittle. Her husband looked at her, his expression unreadable. Would you, if you were her? I did what I thought was best, she replied, more to herself than to him. Hyun was the face, the one who... She was never the only one, he interrupted gently. Those words, so mild, cut deeper than any accusation. Madame Jung straightened her back, lifting her chin slightly, as if posture could protect against regret. I didn't mean to, but you did. He didn't say it cruelly, but with the clarity of a man finally facing truths he'd long ignored. You let Hyun shine at Jisoo's expense, we both did. Madame Jung's hands, adorned with rings and a lifetime of curated elegance, tightened around the edge of her chair. What are we supposed to do now? She's everywhere, on every screen, and she hasn't even acknowledged us. Then maybe it's time we acknowledge her. He stood, slow but certain. I'm going to see her. You'll go like this? She asked, alarmed. Without preparing anything? I think we've prepared enough images for one lifetime. He left without waiting for agreement. Jisoo was at the HN Group campus, reviewing early concepts for a design fellowship she and Seojin were preparing to launch. The foundation would support young creators who had been rejected or ignored, by family, by institutions, by the world. It was an idea born from the very silence she'd once lived under. When her assistant entered with a hesitant knock and whispered, "There's someone here to see you." "Your father." Jisoo's hands froze over the sample papers. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she nodded. She met him in the building's private courtyard, a space filled with low greenery and smooth stone benches. It was quiet here, deliberate. He looked older than she remembered, not in age but in bearing, less guarded, less rehearsed. "Appa," she said, uncertain. He bowed slightly. "Jisoo." She waited. "I came to say," he began, "that I am sorry." Her breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. "I was proud of you, always," he continued. "But I was also afraid. Afraid that if we didn't push Haeun forward, our name would fade, that we had to bet everything on the brightest flame." "You thought I couldn't burn," she said, quietly. He looked pained. "I thought you shouldn't have to." They sat on a stone bench, side by side but with space between them. "I watched that interview," he said. "I watched you speak on stage. I read your articles. And I realized, none of this is new. You've been building this version of yourself for years. We just refused to look." Jisoo was quiet. "I came," he said, "not to ask for forgiveness, that's too easy. I came to ask if you'll let us begin again." She turned to him slowly. "Us? Your mother wants to come too. She's struggling, but she sees it now. Not just what we did to you, but what we missed in you." Jisoo folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not angry anymore. I was, for a long time. But now I'm tired. And I'm not interested in performing forgiveness for the comfort of others." Her father nodded. "I don't ask for that, only for the chance to learn how to know you, as you are." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the powerful head of the Jung family, but a man trying for the first time to be more than a figurehead. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. "We can talk," she said. It wasn't a bridge, but it was a beginning. That night, in their home, Madame Jung approached her daughter's room and opened a small chest. Inside were childhood drawings, old report cards, folded letters Jisoo had once written to her parents during school trips. She had kept them, all of them. She sat there for hours, reading in silence, the quiet finally filling with memory instead of avoidance. The next week, Jisoo visited the family home for the first time in over a year. She didn't stay long. There were no declarations, no tears, only a meal shared in semi-silence, small exchanges, polite gestures. But when she left, she felt something strange, heavier than closure but lighter than pain. She had not returned as the daughter they once ignored. She had returned as a woman they now feared losing. The hall was quiet, but not with silence. It breathed anticipation. It was a benefit gala for a children's literacy foundation, held at a cultural center on the banks of the Han River. Unlike the ostentatious banquets of old money, this event was marked by thoughtful elegance. Soft lighting, walls lined with student artwork, music played by a youth orchestra funded by donations. The crowd that gathered there was not merely wealthy, they were patrons of change, thinkers, artists, educators. Jisoo had not planned to attend. She had received the invitation weeks earlier and set it aside without thinking. But Seojin had insisted. "You inspired this project," he told her. "It exists because of a conversation you had with their director 2 years ago. It would mean something if you were there." So she went. She wore an ivory dress, minimal and structured, with no designer name attached. Her hair pulled back, face bare except for a soft lip color. She didn't try to hide, but she didn't want to dazzle either. Her presence was her message. She spent the first hour quietly speaking to educators and organizers. She listened more than she talked. Few approached her with fanfare. She had, by then gained a reputation for disliking attention for attention's sake. Seojin arrived later, as was often his habit. He moved like someone who didn't need to announce his arrival. He shook hands, shared brief laughs, and offered real questions instead of platitudes. But he kept looking across the room to where Jisoo stood, and when their eyes met, the entire space seemed to slow. No one else saw the signal pass between them, but something shifted. As dinner was served, Seojin approached the stage. He hadn't been listed as a speaker. Whispers started immediately. Phones were lifted discreetly. The director of the foundation offered a brief introduction, then handed him the microphone. "I wasn't supposed to speak tonight," he began. "But I asked for a moment, not as a CEO, not even as a donor, but as a man who has learned something essential, that some of the most important voices in a room are the ones that don't shout." There was a pause. Then he smiled softly. "There's someone here who changed my life. She did it not with drama or demands, but with a quiet kind of brilliance that reshapes the way you see the world." The audience murmured gently. Some already knew what was coming. Others didn't dare assume. She's not the loudest person at any table, but she always knows when to speak, and when she does, the room listens, because her words are earned. Jisoo, seated midway back, didn't move. "I thought I was here tonight to honor education," Seojin continued, "but truthfully, I'm here to honor her. Because she's the reason I see education as more than just a system. It's an act of hope, of faith, of building futures we may never live to see." He stepped down from the stage, and as the music swelled, the lights shifted subtly, not to a spotlight, but a soft glow that followed him through the rows. Every step was steady. Every eye was on him. He stopped in front of her. For a second, there was no sound. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a ring unlike any other, no oversized diamond, no flash. A thin platinum band shaped in a twisting design, inspired by the spirals of thread Jisoo once showed him in her sketchbook. In its center, a single opal, white and iridescent. Quiet, timeless. He knelt. "Jung Jisoo," he said, his voice low but clear enough to echo through the hall. "You taught me that brilliance doesn't need a stage, that gentleness can be revolutionary, that love doesn't shout, it stays." She couldn't breathe. "I want to build with you," he said, "to learn from you, to be your partner, in the work that matters, and in the life that waits outside the spotlight." He held out the ring. "Will you marry me?" The hall held its breath. Jisoo stood, slowly. She looked down at the man who had watched her long before anyone else. Bothered to look. The one who chose her without spectacle, and now with just enough of it to remind her that she mattered to more than just herself. She reached out, voice trembling. "Yes." The applause didn't explode. It unfolded, warm, rising like a tide. No cameras flashed. No confetti fell. But the room buzzed with something stronger than celebration. It buzzed with belief. After the event, the videos circulated in minutes. But they didn't trend for scandal or wealth. They trended because of the simplicity of it. Because two people had turned a moment into meaning. Comment sections overflowed not with jealousy or gossip, but with something rare, admiration. "She didn't need a fairy tale," one post read. "She needed to be seen," and he saw her. The next day, news outlets called it the engagement of the year, not because of who they were, but because of how they loved. And in a quiet apartment far from the city center, Haeyeon watched the footage alone again. This time she didn't look away. The world kept moving, but something in Jisoo's life had shifted irreversibly. The proposal marked not just a public milestone, it marked an internal transformation. For the first time in her memory, her story no longer revolved around how others perceived her, but intorno do que ela mesma decidia construir. And she didn't want to build alone. She and Seojin didn't disappear into extravagance after the engagement. There were no lavish photo shoots or televised interviews. Instead, they returned to their routines, now shared: early morning coffee over policy documents, long walks in city parks discussing urban education, and evenings spent reading over proposals for what they began calling the second house. The idea came to Jisoo in the middle of a quiet afternoon, sitting with a letter from a young student who had been rejected by her family after coming out. The girl wrote, "I saw you speak on stage. You said you were ignored. I'm not even hated. I'm just gone. I wish there was a house for people like me." Jisoo read the letter twice, then brought it to Seojin without saying a word. He read it, nodded once, and replied, "Then we'll build it." That was the beginning of the institute. Not a shelter, not a school, but something new. A place where young people rejected by their families could find mentorship, education, and a new definition of home. It would blend creative arts, tech access, and emotional resilience training, a hybrid of everything Jisoo had lived and dreamed. They called it the second house. In private meetings with potential partners, some raised concerns. "It's too idealistic," one investor warned. "You'll attract the wrong press," another added. "There's no profit model." But Jisoo stood firm. "We're not building it for profit. We're building it so people who've been told they don't belong can walk into a space and know that they do." And Seojin, sitting beside her, always added, "That's what real infrastructure is, building what society forgot." Word spread, not fast but steady. Architects offered designs pro bono. Therapists reached out. A major university proposed a long-term collaboration, and for every article about their engagement, a deeper one emerged about the second house. It became more than a project. It became a movement. Meanwhile, Haeun was still absent from the world that once devoured her every post. Her social media accounts remained dark. The influencer campaigns she once dominated now belonged to younger faces. She had stepped out of the spotlight, but not out of existence. In her silence, she began to think. Without a schedule filled with appearances and photo shoots, Haeun found herself walking, not shopping, not dining, walking, through neighborhoods she had never entered before. She sat on park benches and listened to conversations she would have once dismissed as noise. She began to notice things. A mother folding flyers into her baby's stroller, a teenager sketching shoes onto cardboard because he couldn't afford the real ones. And for the first time, her mind stopped asking, "What will they think of me?" and started asking, What have I missed?" She did not post about these walks. She did not turn them into content. She simply lived them, unsure of where they would lead. But they led somewhere. One morning she walked into a youth center in a quieter part of Seoul and asked, "Do you need volunteers?" The woman behind the desk stared for a second, then shrugged, "Always." And so Haeun stayed, not as Jung Haeun, the brand ambassador or the face of elegance, but as Haeun, a woman with her hair tied back in a loose bun, sweeping floors, after art class, handing out notebooks, listening without speaking. The people there didn't care about her past. They didn't ask about her family. They didn't mention her sister. They just let her be. At first, that absence stung. Then, it healed. And across the city, in the sunlit conference room of the design wing of HN Group, Jisoo read an anonymous donation receipt to the second house. No name, just a message. For those who had to learn late what kindness really means. She knew, but she didn't call. It wasn't time yet. As construction for the second house began, Jisoo and Seojin made a choice. They would hold the wedding quietly, without press or spectacle, a ceremony in the mountains, attended only by those who had truly seen them, friends from old projects, mentors, students, people whose names were never printed, but whose impact was permanent. There would be no flower walls, no choreographed entrances, just vows whispered under wind between trees and above the noise of a world that had once ignored them both. But before that day came, Jisoo walked once more through the halls of her childhood home. She paused at the staircase where Haeun used to call her names, at the dining table where her parents once spoke only of appearances, at the piano she was never allowed to play, and in the silence she felt no anger, only clarity. She wasn't returning for closure. She was simply proving to herself that she could walk through any room, and no longer need to disappear inside it. The hall was the same towering ceilings, the same crystal chandeliers, the same marble floors that had once reflected every step Jisoo took, like they were judging her. It was the same place where she had once stood, shamed and small, trying to disappear while others looked through her as if she didn't exist. But tonight the room was different. It wasn't the lighting or the decor. It was the atmosphere, thicker with awareness, thinner in pretense. The people were the same in name, but not in posture. They stood straighter, spoke quieter. They had learned something. Not all of them would admit it, but they had learned. At the entrance, murmurs rippled as the doors opened. Jisoo stepped in. Beside her was Seojin, dressed not to impress, but to accompany. His presence did not command, it confirmed. He walked at her pace, let her lead the gaze of the room. She wore no jewels, no sweeping gown, just a tailored black dress, simple, elegant, and unmistakably hers. Her hair was tied back, and her eyes were steady. She did not smile out of obligation. She did not lower her gaze. She walked like she belonged. The same voices that had once doubted her now whispered her name with hesitation, some with awe, others with guilt. There she is. That's her. I can't believe. But none of them approached. Not yet. Jisoo and Seojin moved toward the center of the hall. The event, another gala, another night for socialites and sponsors, had already lost its original purpose. Now all eyes followed them, not for drama, not for scandal, but because they had become something no one in that room could manufacture, a story that changed the tone of an entire world. At one end of the hall her parents stood. Madame Jung, ever composed, gave a single nod when their eyes met. Her father, slightly more human now than ever before, lifted his glass, quiet, respectful. Neither reached for a performance. That chapter was over, but Jisoo's eyes moved past them, to the corner. Hyun stood alone. She wore a simple dress, far removed from her usual extravagance. No entourage, no photographers, just her. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers twisting slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't move forward. But her eyes, those proud, sharpened eyes, watched her sister not with envy, not with disdain, but with something unfamiliar. Recognition and remorse. Jisoo didn't smile. She didn't wave. But she looked, held the gaze, let the air between them swell with all the words they would never say. And Hyun nodded. It was almost imperceptible. But it was there, not an apology, not a request, just an acknowledgement. And in that moment, no apology was needed. The silence that passed between them spoke of everything, of the childhood rivalry, the bruises that had no names, the years of being overlooked, the moment stolen, the space denied, but also of something new, a kind of fragile understanding that didn't demand reconciliation to exist. It was enough. A few feet away, a violinist resumed playing. The music drifted, filling the space between the polished guests and the raw truth that had settled among them. Jisoo turned back to Seojin. "We don't have to stay long," she said. "I know. But I wanted them to see," she added quietly. "Not the success, not the ring, just me, standing." "They see it," he replied. "They've never seen anything more clearly." They walked through the room once, greeted a few mentors, spoke briefly with the organizers, but they didn't linger. They didn't pose. They didn't correct the rumors, because they no longer needed to. And when they reached the exit, Jisoo paused one last time, not to remember the pain, but to recognize how far she had come from it. Behind her, the guests continued murmuring, but none of it reached her. Her silence now wasn't the silence of someone trying not to offend. It was the silence of someone who no longer needed to defend. And Hyun, watching her from across the room, understood finally what no insult could bury, no spotlight could erase. The day she had shouted, "No one will ever want you," had not broken Jisoo. It had freed her. Because that was the day the world stopped trying to speak over her, and Jisoo in return had chosen not to retaliate, but to rise. The final silence in the hall was not empty. It was full, full of respect, full of reckoning, full of a presence that had once been invisible and now filled the room without saying a word. And so Jisoo walked out, not as someone discovered, but as someone finally seen.